right before the finale of Dune Prophecy, we got news that it was renewed for a season 2, which I guess isn't surprising considering how big of a property Dune is, but I have very mixed thoughts on this show, and it honestly didn't seem like that many people were even watching it despite it being reported as the most streamed title on Max. It was never trending on Twitter as far as I could tell, and I heard from a lot of people that they either tried it and just didn't stick with it past the first 1 or 2 episodes, or they just never gave it a shot at all. I've been doing spoiler breakdowns for each episode, and now I kind of want to talk about the show as a whole and start spoiler-free for those who might be wondering if the show is even worth watching, and then get into spoilers a bit at the end, talk about what might happen in season 2, because I'm so sorry guys, the holidays have been very busy, so I didn't get to do an individual episode for the finale, and I actually thought the finale was a really solid episode and kind of showed the potential of what this show could be if it had more breathing room. The finale was an hour and a half long, and I just thought it ended on a really good note. Right when I thought I was out, they pull me back in. And there is a silver lining to the first season only being 6 episodes if you want to get caught up for season 2, but it was also behind some of the biggest issues people had with the show. To me, I also came away feeling like it was frustrating that it felt more about the destination than the journey. It's very driven by your interest in finding out these big secrets, and they feel varying amounts of rewarding. I was very on board with episode 1 through 3, and though I talked about episode 3 as not being an episode that I loved, I think it has some of the best content in the show. It was only that there were only 6 episodes in the season, and they kind of went back to the beginning of the story, and I was like, what are we doing here? I started to get a little restless after that, almost like the show was constructed to have a beginning and end point, and then they kind of had to figure out how to connect the two together. For the big Dune fans, there's a lot that you're seeing brought to life in this that we haven't seen in the films and probably never will, so that might be very appealing to some people. It's another element that was hit or miss for me. Some things I thought were given justice, some things felt kind of plopped in. I either wish we would spend more time with it or that it was depicted differently. An example that people have seen in the trailers that isn't a spoiler is the machine wars themselves. It's not only annoying that they refuse to say the word jihad, but I'm also not a huge fan of the more Brian Herbert evil robot direction. At least that part is mostly in like very quick flashbacks in the first episode. The more modern technology we see throughout the show isn't half bad. And I know Brian Herbert is another concern for people, as a lot of Dune fans aren't very keen on his writing for the prequel books, but I will say that this is not by any means a straight adaptation of his work. I was actually surprised by how much it is not an adaptation, but instead more of a reworking of events from Sisterhood of Dune and some of the other prequel books, even changing the timeline around, which, as I've said before, gives book readers things to discover as well, which I see as a big positive for the show. And as a fan of anything, I guess, I don't want to see things brought to life just for the sake of it, but I don't think this feels as key jingling as some of the more egregious things they've done with like Star Wars and in the MCU. The things I thought were done very well by the end of the season were mostly with the Bene Gesserit themselves, especially as they began to show the more vicious, ruthless side of Valia Harkonnen and the differing schools of thought within the Bene Gesserit, since this was still earlier days for them. Valia and Tula's relationship has a lot to it, and the performances from both Emily Watson and Olivia Williams are very strong, but I also really liked Travis Fimmel as Desmond, Chloe Lee as Lila, and some of the best scenes in the show are flashbacks where Jessica Barden and Emma Canning do a great job playing young Valia and young Tula, respectively. There have been a lot of comments about them just doing Game of Thrones in space, and it could definitely oscillate between a more generic tone with the politics and even the more like Star Wars-y futuristic elements. It's also where the writing is the weakest, but I do think most of the Bene Gesserit elements have that unique feeling of Dune. So if you haven't tried watching it or you gave up, I have to be honest and say that if you can get through mostly episode 4 and 5. Like, I really didn't love those episodes, but I think there is real potential that season 2 will improve on some of the weakest parts of the first season. Is it even a fraction as good as the movies? No. Is it the best show in the world? No, and it's not going to become a truly great show out of the blue, and if there wasn't going to be a season 2, I would probably say don't bother. But considering the story is going to continue and the actual Dune-esque parts of it are pretty intriguing, I think there are worse uses of your time, especially if you're a big fan of the lore in the world. And now there are a couple things I want to touch on about the finale, so this is your official spoiler warning if you're not caught up, but let me know if you guys plan on checking it out or finishing the show. I'm very curious if having a season 2 on the horizon changes things for people. But again, I thought the finale was super solid, like a big change in quality compared to episode 5, probably mostly due to the runtime. At an hour and a half long, the scenes felt longer and more meaningful, and we finally got the things that it felt like they'd really been stretching out through the duration of the season. I think I said in my last breakdown that it's this weird mix of being kind of choppy and not spending a lot of time in certain moments, but also taking its sweet time and stretching some things out. So I hope that they learn from the response that 6 episodes might not have been the best call. I would much prefer to have great conversations between characters and really get into the nitty-gritty of things than have, you know, the big reveals and all of that. The whole mystery around Desmond didn't even get resolved, which I'm okay with because it's obviously going to continue being the center focus of the show, but we did get the big reveal that the 2 glowing eyes were in fact a machine that had just been distorted in his memory. I'm tempted to say it's kind of a cheap misdirect. Like, I feel like both this and the virus itself being the whole, like, fear is the mind killer origin story are bordering on silly just because of how reverse engineered it feels from stuff we're already familiar with. That said, it does set up a pretty solid direction for season 2. Like, everything is established. The more boring elements regarding Havako, rest in peace, and the rebellion are kind of done, and a lot of it will take place on Arrakis as they try to retrace the steps of what happened to Desmond. I'm kind of liking the sound of it, and I'm also not done hoping that Vorya and Atreides will show up. I think it's more likely than not that Desmond Hart will end up being a Ghola, so it would be really cool for the Tleilaxu to be a big part of the show going forward, since the ideologies surrounding technology are such a big part of it. And we got the whole thing about Theodosia being an early experiment as a face dancer, something that I actually thought was confusing at best and underwhelming at worst when it actually came into play. But I like how dark the finale got with this scene of Valia using the voice on all the acolytes who didn't want to follow her and discovering the literal skeletons in the closet of the Bene Gesserit. We finally understand why Sister Avila is always constantly kind of there resisting everything, because she was the only one who kind of bent the knee to Valia. I liked that detail. There were a lot of little things in the finale that really felt like they finally clicked into place, and I want to give them credit for that. It's very close to being like too little too late, but with how things wrapped up, I'm like, okay, I see what you're doing. I was a little frustrated getting there, but I'm not quite out yet. But those are my general thoughts about season 1 of Dune Prophecy, guys. Let me know what you thought of the season. And again, sorry this video is a little late, but thank you to everyone who tuned into all the breakdowns throughout the season. I said it a million times, but it was really fun to do, and maybe I'll even do season 2 of the show. So let me know if you plan on checking that out. Do you have high hopes for it? Don't forget to like and subscribe and keep an eye out for more videos soon. Thanks for watching.